Welcome to Ponchatoula Live, the show where we make it easy for you to connect with the people of Ponchatoula. I'm your host, Parker Layrisson, and today I've got a fantastic guest. This is one of my lifelong heroes. Now, I'll confess he's a member of my family, so I'm biased. This is my cousin that I love dearly and have known my whole life. But he was always a few years ahead of me doing really interesting stuff, and maybe we can get into that in a bit. He is now a business owner, a healthcare professional, and what I really hope we talk about a good bit today is his role as the CEO and founder of an incredible nonprofit that helps sex trafficking survivors. He's also a longtime college football referee. The list goes on and on. But without further ado, I'll introduce you to my cousin, Scott Vaughan. Scott, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
I'm really glad you're here. Why don't we kick things off with you just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Well, as you, born and raised right here in Ponchatoula, Louisiana, where I've spent the majority of my life. And I love this small town, even though my office is located in Metairie. I don't mind the 45-minute drive and really love the drive home to still have that small town life and be in that small town feel.
Yes, it's neat to see you stay here because, like you say, your business is down there. It's obviously a much bigger community, more vibrant business community, more patients to treat, more dollars to be made. And you could have moved down there, live closer, shorten your commute, but you stayed loyal to Ponchatoula here, and that's been a great thing because I know you're not public about this, and you're not a braggart, but I go over, all around town, and I run into people. And I see, much like your dad did before you helping people in small, generous, and anonymous ways. I could be driving through at Hi-Ho, and the lady will say, "Oh, your cousin Scott Vaughan, he put my daughter through dance school," or just whatever. So what I'm getting at here is our community is very fortunate that you stayed here all these years when it would have been easier probably to move down the road. So thanks for doing that. Why don't we focus first here on what it was like growing up here, because that kind of love of Ponchatoula probably comes from a deep-rooted, positive childhood experience. And if that's correct, tell me what it was like for you growing up in Ponchatoula.
Well, it always has that small town family feel. And of course, our family has always been here. Mm-hmm. And Ponchatoula is a very safe town. Going to Ponchatoula High School was nice because it was a small high school then. I think our graduating class was like barely over 200 people, and today graduating class is probably close to 1,000.
You mentioned that you're not off by much. Probably. I just left Ponchatoula High School the hour before our show here. There was a meeting for a community group that's supporting the high school, and Dr. Caminita, the principal, and Michelle Hills and several other teachers were there. And there are now well over 2,000 students out there. So you're right, night and day between the AJ Bodker era that you attended and the Anna Faye Caminita era, now. But you're right, the town's grown, the high school's grown, but there's still a small town charm that kind of differentiates us from Metairie. Now, you grew up, as I recall, at this great house that your parents built with a swimming pool in the backyard. Yeah. And, tell me what life was like in the Vaughan house with a brother, a sister, active parents, and a great location like that. What was life like for you?
Well, I tell you, having the swimming pool was a big plus because then everybody wanted to come to my house because I think at that time we had the first and only swimming pool in Ponchatoula, Louisiana. So everybody always wanted to gather at my house and do crawfish boils and have swimming parties, and it was always a good time at the Vaughan household on the weekends.
Yeah, and you had a big giant basketball court in back. I
forgot about that too. Yeah, I had that big basketball court that my dad had.
You'll get a kick out of this because this was long after you moved out and even after your family sold it. But eventually my very dear friends, Doug and Sissy Daigle, moved in there. Their daughter is my oldest boy's godmother, Angelique. And we would go over there to play after school just like you and your buddies did. But my dad and I were coaching basketball together, and Dad wanted me to get a little extra time in with some of our key players. So your court was the biggest, non-sanctioned court. So we would go back in the old Vaughan backyard and work through some stuff with Louie and Big Rob Walker and maybe Kevin Leschere and some different guys that were players. Yeah. So and I know that the Daigles still live there, and now their grandkids are yucking it up back there. And that pool on that court is still getting good use. So, who did you run with back in the day? Was it neighborhood kids? Was it family members? A bit of both? Kind of when you were a child, what was your posse like?
Yeah, I tell you, it was a combination of both. I hung out with the guys I played baseball with, like Kevin Beal and his brother Timmy Beal, and golly, let's see, Melvin Myers.
Oh yeah, great guy.
Stephen Stokes and I were really good friends,
Mm-hmm.
and boy, those are some good times. You're bringing back some old memories asking me that question.
Well, Coach Myers was my high school civics teacher, but I do remember he was a dear friend of you and my brother Jean Paul, and just a great guy, great family. His brother, Box as we called him, was my coach back in the day. Just a wonderful family. So speaking of wonderful families, let's talk about we'll do a brief intro with my Aunt Myra, your grandmother, and her sister Inez, my grandmother. They were known as the Parker sisters once upon a time.
That's
and their
correct.
family moved down here around the turn of the century, around 1900, a little bit before that. But they were born shortly thereafter. And, both ladies lived a long time, particularly Aunt Myra, your grandmother, and were kind of staples of the community. So before I get into asking you about your mom and dad and brother and sister, tell us a little bit about Myra Vaughan and, what impact she had on your life, because I know she was beloved in this community.
Oh my gosh, I tell you, I still today will have people come up and tell me that one of the main reasons that they would attend the Catholic Church on Sunday would be to listen to my grandmother read, from the Bible. And, I get such a kick out of that and a thrill out of that because she was so enthusiastic with the way that she would tell a story or she would read a book. And, not only in the church setting, but I remember that as a young child when she would read me a bedtime story of just how enthusiastic she was. It was like she should be in theater. She should be in play.
And didn't she have a background in acting? You're right. She was theatrical and you would hang on every word.
Mm-hmm.
And really, she lived to be 105 years old.
Amazing.
And,
amazing woman.
Kept that wit, for certainly well over 100 years.
Yes.
But she was so charming. I think probably the most charming person I've ever met in my life.
She was a perfect example of a true Southern woman. And so was her sister, which was your grandmother.
Yeah. Her sister Inez was just a wonderful grandmother to me, as Myra was to you. And it was really a beautiful thing to watch them grow old together through thick and thin. They were both widowed at a fairly early age and never remarried. And they were just wonderful matriarchs of the community. And it's really neat to share that legacy with you. And she raised such a fine, man in your father, Jack Parker Vaughan, who is your dad and my godfather. So why don't you tell us, starting with your dad and then your wonderful mother, Margaret, what your parents were like and what it was like growing up in their house.
Yeah. Well, my mom reminds me a lot of my grandmother, just that, if you had a definition of a Southern woman, you'd have to look no further than my grandmother and my mother. And,
absolutely. 100% lady.
Yeah, I was very blessed and fortunate to have both of those ladies in my life and be an inspiration in my life. And then to have my dad and watch what he did and accomplish, and and then his career as a National Football League official and all the traveling that I got to do with him as a young boy and a young man, and even up until he retired from the NFL, it was I don't think I could have lived a better childhood than what I did. I was very fortunate and very blessed to have the mom and dad that I had growing up.
Yeah, it's funny. My dad was in here yesterday in this office, and over to the side over here, I have some old bottles. As you know, our families were in the bottling business, Falstaff beer in your case, and Knee-High Cola in mine. And Dad was talking about how neat it was to grow up in that experience, because it was kind of like the Willy Wonka factory in that if you wanted a grape soda pop, you went and pulled it fresh off the line. And for you, it's like the sports version of the kid in the candy store, right? I mean, it's like, here's your dad working in the NFL for 24 years, bringing you to all these Super Bowls that he officiated, and more year after year. That had to be so special. And I know he was so proud of you to see you continue the legacy as an SEC official. I mean, you were in college football for 20 years,
24 years.
24 years through the
24
Big
years.
12, the SEC. And I'm going to ask you about that more specifically as we kind of get to that part of your life.
Okay.
But I know how proud he was of you, that you did that, because it's a family legacy. He wasn't the first. I mean, he hit the pinnacle of, calling the Super Bowl multiple times.
Right.
There's no bigger deal than that. But, also, you were third generation SEC. Is that right?
That's correct. My grandfather officiated in the SEC, and then my dad and myself. And that's when I was in the Big 12. That's the reason I went over to the SEC. My dad wanted me to be the only third generation SEC football official in the world. And I tell you, that really made him happy.
What a cool legacy. Yeah, because I bet it was fun traveling out there in the West. I mean, those are some good destinations in the Big 12. Well, let's talk Big 12 era. We talked about growing up here in Ponchatoula. Your family, you just like you said, staple of Ponchatoula, been here forever, very well respected. But you kind of had the courage to buck the trend and go away for school. I mean, most folks, even if they have means to go elsewhere, seem to settle around here, Southeastern, LSU, etc. But tell us, what inspired you to kind of make that leap and leave town for the college part of your life?
I think it was just time to experience other things in the world, different locations. I think that never bothered me because of all the traveling that I did with my dad from a child to a young man. So being, able to leave Ponchatoula never concerned me. There wasn't any ever fear there about it. Maybe some people get complacent and comfortable just in the place they grew up in and just don't want to move away. But I wanted to see what else was out there. And I'd already gotten to experience quite a bit of it through football officiating. And it was just a tremendous experience.
Well, what was it like as the son of a football official, on the road? Give us some examples, or an example, if you don't mind, of the places you went, the things you saw. I know there's many more than we could ever cover in this brief interview, but when I bring that up, what comes to mind?
I tell you, Parker, the first thing that comes to mind is how defensive that I would get for my dad. Because, if I would walk out on the field with the officials and then walk into the stand before into the seating area before kickoff and hear the comments that fans would make towards the officials and the abuse, I was shocked, and I was so defensive and wanting to take up from my dad and the rest of the crew that was on the field. And that took a little bit to get used to. That was an adjustment.
I bet it was in some ways similar to us Layrisson boys hearing people yapping about our dad when he was sheriff, because even though like your father, he served 24 years, right? I mean, longer than any sheriff ever. The first to ever retire undefeated after such a long tenure. And but there's always, no matter how successful you are in politics, a loud minority that's going to be griping about the calls that you make. And it is very tough, sometimes tougher for that family member than the person who's actually in the arena making the call. So that's pretty neat. Would you mind telling us a little bit about the iconic photograph of Uncle Jack from the big Fog Bowl in Chicago? Because I don't think many people in the community know that this person from Ponchatoula is essentially the centerpiece of one of the most famous and best sports photographs of all time.
It is. I think I'm spot on when I give this stat is in Sports Illustrated's top 100 sports photos that the Fog Bowl is number 36. And it's a picture of my dad under the right upright, and you can barely see the ball from a field goal coming through the fog, and Dad standing under that right upright. The picture from behind it is on the left, but from a player's perspective, it would be on the right. And, he's standing there, and it's a good ground shot, camera shot, looking upward through Dad, and he's watching that ball come through the uprights. And I think that game was December 31st, 1988, and it was between, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was between Philadelphia and Chicago. And the crazy thing about that is the weather was beautiful for the first half.
I never knew that. Wow.
Yeah. And then
because seeing that photo, you can't even really see the players down the field.
You can.
barely just, but it was so foggy. I mean, you could barely see the ball going through the upright. Yet you're
Correct.
telling me first half it was beautiful.
First half, it was beautiful. And then during halftime, and the NFL halftime is only 11 minutes. It's not a 20-minute halftime. Well, within that time frame, that fog just rolled in.
Wow. Chicago right there on the lake, man. It can change
that's Lake Michigan, I think. So that fog rolled in there, and it's crazy.
Well, I would encourage anybody that's a fan of this sort of thing to Google it. I know the photo is still out there. I've met SI.com and other places, but it's a really amazing picture. And it's really cool. A little bit of local lore for folks that don't know that we kind of have that connection here in Ponchatoula with such a big moment. So, you traveled a lot with your dad. Clearly, this was an incredible experience. And even though you heard people zinging him with unnecessary criticism from the stands from a very young age, you opted to follow in his footsteps. So tell us about that journey. When did it click that you wanted to do what he did? And what was the process like to go from kid in the stands watching dad work to official on the field at the highest levels of college football?
Yeah, that was nothing ever planned. And I never even imagined walking in dad's footsteps or following his footsteps to do officiating. But he and I I attended a game with him in Barcelona, Spain. And the NFL was trying to promote the National Football League overseas, over the pond, as they call it. And I am actually sitting in the hotel bar room during the middle of the day, and I'm having a conversation with the lead singer of Sting.
What?
And,
wow.
It's like I wish we had camera phones and even digital cameras back then, because I'd have been blowing it up on social media. But Dad comes in there and he says, "Hey, I need you to come to the pregame meeting for a minute." And I'm like, "Wait a minute!" I'm in mid conversation, and he didn't understand who that was. And so I went into the pregame meeting with him, and lo and behold, the NFL didn't send over a clock operator for that game. So Dad just volunteers my services. So my excitement of who I was just, having a cocktail with, and the fun of being in Barcelona, Spain, and enjoying that trip, all of a sudden I just had fear come over me. I was like, wait a minute now.
Yeah.
Especially when they handed me a 90-page manual on the clock operations of an NFL football game. But,
wow. So the career kind of starts at the top.
It did. It started at the very top.
I was expecting to hear how you started in Pee Wee League and worked your way up through high school. But you got to start with the NFL in Europe while you're chilling with Sting. That's amazing, man.
Exactly. So, and when they handed me that 90-page manual, then the fear really set in. And I think I was up all night reading that manual over and over and over again. So the next day, everything went off without a hiccup. Everything was great. And then when we flew back home eventually, I just started thinking, what, maybe I want to get into this. So I joined the local high school association, the Hammond High School Football Officials Association. And that's where the journey continued. It started in Barcelona, Spain, and then continued right back here at home.
Wow, that's really cool. Besides your dad, because in him, you obviously have the ultimate mentor, person who's closer to you than anyone, and the person who's hit the highest, levels of that. Who else do you remember that provided you with some guidance or some expertise or some help along the way in your officiating career?
Yeah. Well, just in life in general, I would say your dad, Eddie Layrisson. I mean, just y'all being family and growing up just down the street from each other. Your dad was always instrumental in my life if I needed any advice or anybody to talk to. And so that's really the first person that comes to mind. But, then
he always loved you like a son. Your dad he always tells me, more like a brother than a cousin to him.
Yeah.
And he was his childhood idol. He was, I guess, 5 or 6 years ahead of him, and a big shot quarterback and shortstop. And so I know he had a big interest in you from day one. So I think I cut you off, and for that, I apologize. Who else were you about to mention?
Well, no, I was just going to say, and of course, we talked about my grandmother, Star, and and then my mother herself. So, right there, I just had such a great supporting cast.
Right.
Such a, if you look at it from grassroots, I just had a great base, a great foundation to start from.
Yeah. And what a blessing. We think about people that hit the quote unquote, birth or genetic lottery when they're born into super wealth or fame or whatever, fortune. But what a fortune you grew up with. I mean, to be born into Margaret, Vaughan, now Burner's home, with Myra Vaughan as a grandmother, with Eddie Layrisson down the street, all these people, you didn't really have to go farther than your own family for these great mentors.
Correct.
What a blessing. And that's the kind of thing I think, let's link that to Ponchatoula, because the community deserves a credit. If we couldn't hold this family together in this little community and keep a Tulane graduate like Eddie Layrisson from seeking greener pastures, kind of like you are now, staying here in town, even though your business is bigger, better elsewhere, then you wouldn't have that, right? But Ponchatoula kind of gave us the ability to have this little family exist on 7th Street, multiple generations, and y'all move maybe a block or two over to build the big house with the big pool, but everybody's right there in walking distance, what do you think about that?
Oh, well, you're absolutely right. I mean, I couldn't have asked for a better scenario growing up as a child and a young man, to have the support staff that we all had. I mean, our family always provided that for us. They were always there for us. They always provided us with the leadership that we needed to be able to grow and be successful in life.
Right. And speaking of leadership and example and support, we've got somebody here that well from the good old days, Coach Sidney Wilkinson.
Oh, yeah. Hey, Coach.
Coach, thanks for tuning in. We've heard so many people sing your praises on this show. I know you were coach at PHS when Scott came through in those good old A.J. Bodker years in the 1980s that we mentioned. So thank you for tuning in. And I want to use this as an example to let any other viewers who are watching live know that we have the ability during this live show now to put your comment up here. So if you've got a question for Scott about officiating in the SEC or in NFL Europe or, anything else, please, by all means, make a comment below. I'll do my best to put it up here on the screen and get it up here, because we want this show to be as interactive as possible. So let's talk about the next chapter. I promise I'm going to get into that wonderful logo on your chest, Unbranded, and the incredible things that you're doing through that nonprofit that my firm and myself, fully support. But before we do, I want to hear about your professional career, because I think around here, people know you as a nice guy we see around town who's always been here, like your dad and your grandmother before us, and your mother and all your family. We know, of course, the kind of high octane part of your life that people are interested in, which is this football officiating, because Lord knows everybody wants to hear about what it's like at the Super Bowl and the SEC and all this stuff. But I don't think people understand what an accomplished healthcare professional you are, and also a business owner. So if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you specifically about First Down Healthcare and the things y'all do a bit later. But tell us about how you got started in the career in healthcare and kind of the places you've gone, the things you've done, and the things you've seen.
Yeah. Well, from playing sports all my life, I wanted to do something that would probably or maybe keep me involved in it. So that's when I started looking into physical therapy and, maybe potentially working with a team. But then after I finished that part and got my degree in physical therapy, it just kind of shifted into a different area, not so much into the sports, but into spine rehabilitation, where I worked at the Florida Back Institute in Boca Raton, Florida, which is one of the most highly recognized spine institutes in the world, and got to work under two legendary doctors, Dr. Jordan Davis, who was a neurosurgeon, and then Dr. Jeffrey Fernio, who was an orthopedic spine surgeon. So learned a tremendous lot from them, and working in Boca Raton, Florida, and being around those types of people, that was a big inspiration. And a lot of leadership guidance I got from that area.
Yeah, that's some big time talent. And I think about it, I don't even think that Hammond had a neurosurgeon in town during that area. I know when I started my practice and got out of law school in like 2002, I don't think North Oaks yet had a neurosurgeon. So, and a lot of these other clinics that are now operating in the area, from neuromedical to Baton Rouge Orthopedic, et cetera, we're not yet here. So that's the kind of opportunity you could have never gotten here. And it's neat that you got away. And if you don't mind, I'll share a story how that came back to help me and another fellow I just left about an hour ago, Chance Inman, and a few others. Once upon a time, I was fortunate enough that my friend Chance and his company, Janny King, flew me to the Super Bowl to watch the Saints win. And we were, not as good of planners as we should have been. And thank God I ran into my cousin Scott totally on a whim. And you were able to not only give us a ride to the Super Bowl that we desperately needed, but man, going around town with you in Miami, I'll never forget going to Joe's Stone Crab, a world famous restaurant, watching this line around the door of big corporate CEOs from all over the world in America being told that there's no room, no chance you'll get a table, etc. lunchtime before the Super Bowl, and you get us waved in, not just to get a table, but to get the table, the Godfather suite in the back corner. So clearly, while you were working that Southern Florida, you made contact. So tell me about that. What was life like in South Florida that ends up resulting in a moment like that?
Well, obviously, I met a lot of people to be able to pull that off every time I went. But I tell you, and this may sound a little shallow, but please don't take it that way. But one of the things that I used to love to do when I would have friends come in town is go to Joe's Stone Crab, not only because it was my favorite restaurant, but they were infamously famous for their 2.5 to 3 hour waits. And I got to know all the maitre d's so well and knew how to handle the tipping situation.
Right.
That anytime we went in and you valet your car, the valet would say, all right, it's a 2.5 to 3 hour wait. And everybody would be with me would be like, I'm not waiting that long. I said, y'all just relax. Just relax. So by the time I got done and, doing that little smoozing part of it, we'd be waved to the front and be seated within 5 minutes. And I just used to love to see the expression on everybody's face that I had with me. Because then, they were all like, who do you know?
Oh, it was a jaw-dropping experience because, again, that would have been impressive on a regular Friday night, right? But we're sitting here at the Super Bowl and, the kind of big money world descends on the city of Miami. And man, your guys, whatever you did to earn their love and trust, they were loyal to you. They stuck with you. And,
and I tell you, it paid off. Dad was down there working Super Bowl 29 between the 49ers and the Chargers that particular year. And Joe Stone Crab does not take reservations. So I talked to the maitre d's and the owner, which was, her name was Joe. Mm-hmm. And I assured them if they had us a table for 50 that I would get her a game ball.
Oh, wow.
So the night before the Super Bowl, that's where the crew and family had their pre-Super Bowl dinner. And, it was funny because we had my grandmother there with us. And grandmother at the time.
Aunt Myra got to go?
Wow. Oh, yeah. Dad had us 50-yard line seats on row one, which then back, was Joe Robbie Stadium. Changed names so many times, I don't even know what the name of it is now. But, it was so funny because we're sitting in there and Cindy Crawford was sitting a few tables over from us. And my grandmother, she just got up and went over and sat with Cindy Crawford and her mom and dad and just started having a conversation.
Oh, wow. She really could. She could charm anyone. Wow. Cindy Crawford, the world's foremost supermodel.
Yeah.
And there's Aunt Myra holding court with her. God, would I give to see that. That's such a neat story. Thank you for sharing that with us. So you kind of go out all over the world, as a professional and, as a referee, and eventually you come home and you start this company, First Down Healthcare, and you provide a myriad of services. So I know you're down in Metairie, but that's accessible for us here. It's a short drive. You make that commute every day. So why don't you tell the folks watching a little bit about what you do in case we might be in need of those services?
Yeah, well, it started out where I was just doing functional capacity evaluations, working with a neurologist there, and did that for many years. So I'd go to court a lot and give my expert opinion on how injured someone may be, how impaired they may be from whatever accident they were involved in. And then in 2016, the neurologist I worked with unfortunately passed away. So then I kind of took things over and shifted gears a little bit. And then that's how it became First Down Healthcare. And I wanted to keep it something football, a football name, because of all the involvement my family's had in the football officiating world all of my life. So that's where the name came about. And then, of course, in 2020, I expanded the business into aesthetics. So, we do dermal fillers, Botox, cool sculpting. We do tattoo removal, laser facials, all types of aesthetic services. And then it became First Down Healthcare and Aesthetics.
Okay.
Even though it's not the greatest name for the aesthetics industry, it's like, well, when I named it First Down Healthcare, I never had any intention of getting into aesthetics.
Right. Well, but it's unique, right? I mean, you're easy to distinguish from all the other aesthetics places that sound the same. So it makes you memorable. But you mentioned one thing in there among the services you provide, which is tattoo removal. And I know this led you to a really interesting, necessary, frankly, frightening when people think about the cause of this. But, it led you to helping sex trafficking victims through your nonprofit Unbranded that you founded. Tell us about that. That's an inspiring story. I happen to know a lot about it behind the scenes because we helped you with some of the legal work.
Yes.
But tell us a little bit about the need for that service, if you don't mind, and
Mhm.
about the great work you're doing in the community.
Yeah, well, in January 2020, when I expanded into the aesthetics, one of the devices I purchased was, the leading technology with doing tattoo removal. And when I was doing tattoo removal for that first year and saw how effective it was, and just how it just removed all the ink without any scarring or any recognition of any type of tattoo that was there previously, by the time we got done with the treatment, I just started thinking, all right, how can I use this to give back to the community? What can I do? There's something I can do with this. So a friend of mine, Courtney Lewis, who I did fundraising with the Alzheimer's Association back in 2013, 2014, I started speaking to her about it, which is coming up on 2 years now. Actually, February will be 2 years since we started this process. And, I knew that I wanted somebody like Courtney to be the CEO of this. And it started to where we were going to get into the program called Jail to Jobs, where you've got people that have served their time and they might have tattoos from the neck up or on their face or from the wrist down, and they needed to get those tattoos removed to get back into the workforce, to get back into society. And then it just kind of transitioned into the human work, sex trafficking industry. And then when we started doing research on that, and I saw the statistics of children that were being sex trafficked, then it went more in that direction, because it just, it touched my heart. It just really would get emotional.
Yeah, well, would you mind sharing some of that info with us? Because I know I've been getting all this great feedback from friends that know that we're related, who watched you speak to our local Kiwanis Club. And frankly, it's a little bit of a shell shock. It's, to a parent like me, it's terrifying to consider. But tell us, if you will, because I know folks understand generally that sex trafficking is an issue. I've seen my niece Avery go into, an aspect of working with a nonprofit to help, help those folks. But I don't think a lot of us understand how prevalent, widespread, and truly scary this is. So would you mind just kind of setting the stage to tell us a little bit about, that kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. What's so frightening about it is that, hundreds of thousands of children starting at the age of 5 years old are targets for sex trafficking. And I think one of the biggest statistics that just really shocks me, and it's sad, it just blows me away mentally, is that a prostituted child is forced to serve 100 to 1,500 clients. And I hate when they use the word clients, because they're, it's like predators. Right. 100 to 1,500 clients a year. And when you look at the upper end of that, a prostituted child, sex trafficked child, can be forced to serve up to 4 clients a day, 365 days a year. That, to me, is one of the most staggering statistics of anything.
It's gut-wrenching
that I've ever even heard about in my life. And that's just one of the reasons I was like, all right, what can I do? What can I do to get back? And, a lot of times the pimps, the Johns or daddies, gorilla pimps, or however you want to refer to them, they brand these children or these sex trafficked kids with a certain brand, so that everybody in that industry knows who they belong to. If you want to, if you see a car logo, you know who that the manufacturer of that vehicle is before you even see a name. I guess you kind of look at it the same way, and it's disturbing. So
absolutely.
So what we're doing is help remove that, or we are removing it, to help with the healing process.
Absolutely. Well, that's God's work, because those poor victims, the survivors, have been through a kind of hell that none of us can imagine or ever hope to. And you're helping them with that healing process. And I commend you for that. I thank you for doing it, for stepping up, and for sharing this, because I know it's uncomfortable to talk about. Heck, it's uncomfortable to hear about. But as a community, we need to know about it.
Yes.
And I think the community needs to see the good you're doing. And, you mentioned, your CEO that you're working with, your co-founder. You're, I think, the CFO of the organization. Right. Is that right? So I know you guys are leaders of that. Tell us about what we can do to help. I'm sure that you guys need help with funding,
Right.
and much more. So if you would tell the Ponchatoula community that might be interested in helping you on this mission, what we can do to help.
Well, the biggest thing right now is funding. We're coming up on 2 years since we started this, and there again, I have to give you a lot of thanks and praise for the work that your staff has done, because going through the documentation of becoming a 501c3 and of course dealing with the government is always very difficult. And if it wasn't for you and your staff being able to help me with all the legal documentation, because there at one time I was coming to your office once a week and sitting down with Stephanie for I think 3 months.
Yeah, that's Stephanie Stafford, our youngest attorney here, and she's a treasure. She's wonderful. I'll defer to you on what the client experience with her is like. I know working with her is great. She's brilliant.
I don't have enough good words to say about Stephanie. I mean, she's amazing. I mean, the work that she did and how she was able to do everything, and to find the right person, which this was so important, to proof everything and then to send it back to us and to say, okay, you need to change this. This is the way it needs to be done. It needs to be worded this way, and then to send it back again for another proof, and just the whole process. She was fantastic.
Her attention to detail is phenomenal. And speaking of attention to detail, I want to thank our producer, Danny Lynn Dennis. She has posted the link here in the comments on how to donate to Unbranded, and also how to get more information about this organization. You can go on there and see about Scott and Courtney, who he mentioned, as well as Dr. Blossom, the medical director, and other folks involved. But please check this out, folks. If you have the ability to donate, please do that. Our law firm's going to do that. It's very important work. And while you're on the topic of singing Stephanie's praises, I want to mention this too, to folks that may have a great idea like Scott, because sometimes you just come up with a great idea, and part of what you want to do. He knew the mission, the importance, once he read these statistics, of protecting these victims and survivors and helping them with the healing process. And of course, he knew the medical technology. He had the world-class technology, the equipment to do it. But like he says, the legal part's tougher to navigate. So one of the things we do, and this isn't an ad because we do it for free when we're able to do this, but we're happy to help qualified nonprofits like Unbranded to attain the status, to draw up the paperwork you need to formally become a nonprofit corporation, to set up a board of directors, bylaws, etc. So that's something we do for free. I've done this for scholarships for kids to go to college, for little league teams, for all kinds of things. Most recently, my friend who's got a ministry. So if you've got a great idea that serves Ponchatoula, we don't have enough time to do everybody that's got a great idea everywhere. But here in Ponchatoula, Stephanie and Megan and Leon and the rest of our team, we want to serve this community by helping you like we helped Scott. So if you've got a great idea, please, by all means, give us a shout. But in the meantime, more importantly, check out unbranded.org and the links provided here and the great things they're doing. So, Scott, I've asked you about your nonprofit. What have you learned doing this? When you think back over 2 years with Unbranded, what comes to mind?
First thing that comes to mind is how fortunate we were being, growing up in a small town, growing up in a different generation. Things have just changed so much today, and technology is a wonderful thing, but it can also be very dangerous too. And the reason I say that is one of the things that I didn't even really think about when I was getting into this and going to these different convenings where you have so many law enforcement there and talking about the hot spots in the state of Louisiana of where a lot of the trafficking happens, is that, one of the comments that I heard an investigator say is that the days of the white van circling the school of the mall parking lot are pretty much over. Traffickers that are trying to recruit, they use social media. They use Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, those gaming devices that a lot of the kids play today, where they could be speaking to someone next door or someone in Indonesia. And, they don't know who they're communicating with. And, these traffickers, they prey on a child that's in an unstable environment, or someone that's had a previous exposure to, some type of sexual abuse. And that just leads me back to being so grateful for the era that we grew up in.
Yeah.
Because we didn't have the social media, we didn't have the games. I mean, we'd ride our bikes around town all evening, and we're told to be home by dark for dinner.
Right.
And it's totally different today. So I'm very grateful and generous for the era that we grew up in.
And it sounds like they're targeting the most vulnerable kids that have already suffered, abuse that none of us would ever even want to imagine. And they're just putting them into hell on earth. It's just so tragic.
Yes, it is. Well,
I've got another comment here I want to share, and this is Miss Faye Ivaniski, one of my favorite people in town. I saw her in the SJS parking lot, in the carpool line over at St. Joseph a few days ago. But she says she remembers meeting you way back, Scott, and you've carried on a great tradition working with our community. She was blessed to know your dad, my Uncle Jack. And you got to know your brother. She got to work with your brother John, at the bank that everybody knew so well. And she just speaks to what a wonderful family you have, and talks about how she used to play jokes on John all the time at the bank. And Miss Faye, I want to thank you for sharing all these fun memories. And I want to use this as an occasion to mention John Vaughan, because your cousin John was such a big deal around here. Chaired everything from the Strawberry Festival to a million community projects, So it's kind of cool to see you carrying on that legacy that your grandmother Myra did, and, and he did. So if you wouldn't mind, tell us, what was it like growing up as John Vaughan's little brother?
Yeah, John was definitely that great older brother, and he was involved in so many things in the community. I think he was probably on every board, from the Strawberry Festival to North Oaks Hospital to just anything you could think of in between. And John was definitely the social butterfly and involved in all those organizations.
Yeah, he was just beloved around here. And man, 3 beautiful children, that he and Noel had. Just wonderful guy. And it's just neat to see you carrying on his legacy. I know, like your dad, John would be very proud of you and what you got going on today. I promised you when we started this interview that I wouldn't keep you too long. I know you're a busy man. Your time's very valuable. We've talked about your career. We've talked about officiating in the SEC. We've talked about unbranded.org, and the great things you're doing with that nonprofit. What have I not asked you about that you'd like to talk about?
You've covered a wide variety and a wide range of things. I'll tell you that. We could sit here and probably talk for hours and hours. There's so much more to tell, really.
Well, I've tried to be thorough. Of course, Scott Vaughan is not a guy you can explain in 1 hour or one day or 1 year even. There's a lot of, what does Shrek say? There's a lot of layers to the onion.
That's definitely.
He's got a lot going on. You're such a dynamic guy, such a talented fella. Somebody I'm so proud to be related to and call a friend, because we were born, we had to be cousins and walk through this earth as relatives. But I'm proud that you've become such a good friend to me and Bree and all of us rotten Larisons. But before we close, I just want to give you an opportunity. If there's anything else on your mind, on your heart, anything at all you'd like to share, please do now, because Ponchatoula is really lucky to have you in this community, Scott.
Yeah, I think, when you were talking about earlier, about, generosity and how my dad was and my mother, I owe everything to them. And, I wish my dad was alive today to, see what I'm working on and what I'm doing. Because as my brother used to always tell me, he'd say, "You're generous to a fault." And I said, "Well, I'm just like my daddy."
Yeah, absolutely. And my dad, he loves this, because my dad shares that trait with you guys. And it's one that's a little confounding, say, to the women in your lives sometimes, Aunt Margaret or mom might not always like it. But dad would say, Uncle Jack would give you the shirt off his back, and he'd be the first guy to buy the entire bar around, and, just donate to charities, both with his money and his time. To a fault. And it's neat to see you do that, because the community needs people that are overly generous, and you and Jack Vaughan and Eddie Layrisson and Bree Layrisson and all these relatives that I grew up with, watching, admiring, etc., are able to do that. So I want to thank you for sharing your time and your story with us today.
Thank you.
I'm not alone in appreciating it. Coach Wilkinson here is to say, great show, Coach. Thank you for chiming in. To all the rest of our viewers, thank you for being here. Feel free to share the link to this show with anyone. We will be back here next week. And Scott, with no further ado, I'll let you get out of here, man. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the time. And if anybody wants to get involved in help, like Parker said, please visit www.unbranded.org.
Amen.
And, even if it's not monetary, you can do, sign up for volunteer work on some events that we'll have upcoming, because we're going to need help there as well.
That'd be great.
But we need everybody's help collectively across the country to be able to achieve what we're trying to do, and to be able to provide the services for these survivors.
Thank you, Scott, for mentioning that. And another thing we can do is share the good word about this organization. One thing I'm going to commit to you to doing after this is I'm going to get back to my Rotary Club and ask them to schedule you to speak at your convenience, and share with us like you did with Kiwanis, because I think the more people that hear about this, the better. So
absolutely.
Thank you for sharing that. Absolutely. And to our loyal listeners that have stuck with us for over 45 minutes, we thank you, and we'll see you next week.